Mr. Chair, we can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this training session. Unfortunately, the mayor is not able to attend today, so I'll be chairing the meeting, if that's okay with everyone. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Township YouTube channel and can be accessed at any time. I would like to now call the roll. Please raise your hand and state your presence when I call your name, if you could, please. Myself, Deputy Mayor Carl Moher, Councillor Watt.
Yes, present.
Okay, Councillor Landsman.
Present.
Okay. Councillor Watson.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Committee member Jim Patterson from the Planning Committee.
Here we go.
Committee member Ken Jackman.
Here.
And committee member Wendy Dunford.
Here.
Now, staff, we have Alana Arthurs, our CIO. Alana, thank you. Deputy Clerk Maternity Chad Hartwig. Our Chief Building Official Brian Fawcett. And our Legislative Services admin, Nicole Zinner, will look after the technical part of this job. And Senior Administrative Assistant Vanessa Sweeting. With the quorum of the council and committee present in attendance, I would call the meeting to order. The only purpose of this meeting is to have presentation from the County of Peterborough and the Autonomy Conservation for training on council and committee members of the many changes that seem to be coming out of work in the last year or so. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest with either committees, either council or the committee? Seeing none, adoption of the agenda, please, for today. If we could adopt the agenda, I assume you've seen it. Okay, Tom, Councillor Tom, what? Second by Sheila. All in favor? Raise your hand, please. Those against? Okay, carried. Okay, we have adoption or delegations, petitions and presentations, and that's how we're going to present this. I'd like to introduce Ian Mudd first, and to follow Ian will be Jennifer Kleinsberg Smith from the ORCA, or Autonomy Conservation, I guess the new name. And Ian, could you start with some of these changes that we in the Planning Committee and Council have been wrestling with in the last year or last number of months anyway. So if you could join us, please. Go ahead, Ian.
Sure, and thank you very much for the introduction. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I do have a presentation for you, and I'm going to try and share my screen here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I've entitled this planning stuff, and I did that for the benefit of your mayor, because every time he comes into my office here at the county, he always makes a comment about us doing our planning stuff and just leaving us to it. So I thought I would aptly name this planning stuff for your committee today. So just as an overview, I thought I would quickly go over the Planning Act and the purpose of the Planning Act, the roles of the province, the county, and the township in administering the Planning Act. Some discussion about the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, and then applicability to severances. And as you could imagine, both the provincial policy statement and the growth plan are fairly detailed documents covering off a number of areas, but I sort of got the inclination that the biggest concern of your municipality revolved more around the environmental aspects of some of the planning issues that you're dealing with. So I have pretty much focused on the natural heritage policies related to both of those documents, and hope it will provide some understanding of, study requirements and some of the requests that are are made with respect to Planning Act applications in your municipality and all municipalities we deal with as they relate to environmental features on the landscape. So just as a legislative overview, we do work within a system where it's a top-down approach. The Planning Act is a provincial act, and as you work through the different documents, they all stem from the Planning Act. So we've got the Provincial Policy Statement, which is a very broad document. It lists a number of provincial policies that are applicable across the entire province. In our area, we also have some other legislation, which is the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. That is a provincial plan that is only applicable to an area which is identified as the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Then we run into the county official plan. Now, as you go through these documents from this point on, each of those documents have to have regard for the higher level document. So we have to have regard in the county official plan for the requirements under the Planning Act. We have to implement the policies of the Provincial Policy Statement and also the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And then what comes out of the county official plan is your township zoning bylaw, and it implements the county official plan and the various designations. And then you can go beyond your zoning bylaw amendment, and you can also have a community improvement plan, which focuses on a very specific area within your local municipality. So the Planning Act itself, it does provide for a land use planning system that's led by provincial policy. It integrates matters of provincial interest into provincial and municipal planning decisions by requiring that all decisions be consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform or not conflict with provincial plans. So this is, as you'll see as we go through this, this is a theme, a recurring theme where the province says, here's the legislation, and as approval authority, doesn't matter what level you're at, it doesn't matter what type of application you're dealing with, you have to ensure that your decisions are consistent and conform with the provincial documents. It also provides for planning processes that are fair by making them open and efficient, timely and accessible. It encourages cooperation and coordination among varying interests, and it recognizes the decision-making authority and accountability of municipal councils, county councils, land division committees, everything. That's all that is identified in the Planning Act and provides the direction for those. The Planning Act also sets the ground rules for land use planning in Ontario and describes how land uses may be controlled and who can control them. It requires council decisions to consider the provincial interests, such as protecting natural resources. It does require municipalities to prepare official plans and policies that guide future development, as well as zoning bylaws and the regulations for minor variances. It also provides the framework for what we do a lot of here at the county, and that is for lot creation. So whether it be through plan of subdivision or condominium or through a consent application to sever lands, all the applicable regulations and details are captured in the Planning Act. And it also ensures the rights of citizens to be notified about planning proposals, to give their views to their municipal council, and provide them with appeal rights to the local planning appeal tribunal, which was formerly known as the Ontario Municipal Board. Now, as far as roles under the Planning Act, so the province is responsible for issuing provincial policy statements. As I noted, they also prepare the provincial plans. So in our area, we've got there's the provincial policy statement, which is applicable to the entire province. We've got the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And in one area of the county, in the Cavan-Monaghan area, there's also the Oak Ridges Marine Act, which is another piece of provincial legislation that we have to have regard for when we're dealing with applications in that area. So these documents promote provincial interests such as protecting farmland, natural resources, and the environment, and focus on the sustainable development. Now, I've pulled this section directly from the Planning Act because I think it's very important that everybody understand this specific requirement that's issued under Section 3.35 of the Planning Act. And it speaks specifically to the policy statements and provincial plans. And it states that a decision of the council of a municipality, a local board, a planning board, a minister of the crown, a ministry of the board, commission, or agency of the government, including the tribunal, meaning LPAT, in respect of the exercise of any authority that affects a planning matter, shall be consistent with provincial policy statements that are issued under subsection 1 and that are in effect on the date of a decision, and shall conform with provincial plans that are in effect on the date or shall not conflict with them. So, you know, situated right in the Planning Act is direction to all approval authorities. Doesn't matter if it's the provincial minister, if it's your committee of adjustment, if it's county council, township council. Cited right in the act is that we all have to ensure that our decisions meet that conformity or compliance test with the provincial policy statements. The next subsection down where it says same, what it's directing there is even comments or submissions or advice on a planning matter. So in your case, let's look at severances where the municipality is a commenting agency. It directs that your comments to the land division should also meet that same consistency test. So you're in theory not recommending something that doesn't conform or doesn't comply with the provincial plans. As far as the county's role under the Planning Act, we prepare and maintain a county official plan. And as you're aware, there's a local component to the plan. And within that local component are the local policies applicable to Douro-Dummer. We're also the delegated approval authority to approve amendments to the county official plan, township official plans, and their plan amendments. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also the approval authority for applications dealing with lot creation, whether that be through consent or plans of subdivision or condominium. And it also ensures that planning decisions and planning documents are consistent with provincial planning statement, policy statement, and conform and do not conflict with the provincial plans. So that's our role. That's in a macro level. That's the type of thing that we deal with and what we have to have regard for. The township's role makes planning decision that will determine the future of your community while balancing provincial, county, and local and development interests. Prepare planning documents such as an official plan. And again, you feed into our local component with your specific plan policies that you want to see. You're responsible for developing your own zoning bylaw and any community improvement plans that you're interested in. And again, there's a requirement that the township ensures planning decisions and planning documents are consistent with the provincial policy statement and do not conflict with any provincial plans. So the recent version of the provincial policy statement came into effect on May 1st of 2020, and it contains policy direction on matters of provincial interest. And it's basically put those into three groupings: build strong, healthy communities, wide use and management of resources, and protecting public health and safety. And situated right at the beginning of the PPS is this ongoing theme that starts in the Planning Act and is now in the provincial planning, provincial policy statement. And it states that in respect of the exercise of any authority that affects a planning matter, Section 3 of the Planning Act requires that decisions affecting planning matters shall be consistent with policy statements issued under the Act. So again, they're just following that theme that, hey, approval authorities, you have a requirement here to make decisions that are in fact consistent with the provincial policies. So what I've done is I've focused on Section 2 a bit here in the provincial policy statement because it does deal with environmental features, and there's a theme here as you'll see as we go through. And specifically, Section 214, development and site alteration shall not be permitted in significant wetlands within ecoregions, and it identifies those. That is our area. And coastal wetlands, we don't have any of those in the county. Section 215 follows that theme. Development and site alteration shall not be permitted in. So it has significant wetlands in the north. It also deals with significant woodlands, significant valley lands, significant wildlife habitat, significant areas of natural and scientific interest, and coastal wetlands. But the key is at the bottom where it says, unless it has been demonstrated that there will be no negative impacts on the natural features or their ecological functions. So what this section is specifically saying is, you're not going to have any form of development within these types of identified features unless it has been demonstrated that the development that's proposed will not have a negative impact on the feature or their function. Sections 216 and 217 follow a similar theme. They deal with fish habitat and also habitat for endangered and threatened species. Can't have any development or site alteration except in accordance with provincial and federal requirements. And so we roll into section 218, and it says development and site alteration shall not be permitted on adjacent lands to the natural heritage features identified in sections 214, 215, and 216. So that's all your wetlands, your natural heritage features such as the ANSIs, the woodlands, valley lands, etc. Unless the ecological function of the adjacent lands has been evaluated and has been demonstrated that there will be no negative impact on the natural features or their ecological functions. So, and just a note here that both the provincial policy statement and the growth plan have an identical definition for development. And development means creation of a new lot, a change in land use. So if you're going through a rezoning application, or the construction of buildings and structures requiring approval under the Planning Act. So that could be if someone's applying for relief from your zoning bylaw for a new structure, or if they're going through a minor variance. All of those are considered development under the provincial policy statement and growth plan. It does allow it does identify three things that do not fall under the term of development. And that's things that maintain infrastructure authorized under an EA process. So roads work, for instance, work subject to the Drainage Act, and underground surface mining for minerals. So when we get into the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, this document was updated in May of 2019, so it's now in full force. The new act went through a couple of versions over a short period of time as a result of some changes in the provincial government, and it contains policy direction on matters of provincial interest within the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and specifically where and how to grow, infrastructure to support this type of growth, and protecting what is valuable. So the growth plan requirement, again, right at the beginning of the document, states that this plan applies to the area designated under Ontario regulation as the Greater Golden Horseshoe Plan area, and all decisions in respect of the exercise of any authority that affects a planning matter will conform with this plan, subject to any legislative or regulatory provisions. So again, following through from the Planning Act, they're identifying right up front any Planning Act decisions that you made, whether it be an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, plans of subdivision, consent applications, minor variances, your decisions have to be in conformity with this document. So in 2017, when they made some changes to the growth plan, and it's gone through a few iterations up to the 2019 version, but they introduced a new feature or a new policy section that dealt with key hydrologic features. And it defines these features as permanent streams, intermittent streams, inland lakes and their littoral zones, seepage areas and springs, and wetlands. And I just wanted to note here that when we're dealing with the provincial policy statement, it's very specific that it's dealing with significant wetlands, what you may have historically known as provincially significant wetlands, also called PSWs. What the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe does is it eliminates just looking at provincially significant wetlands. It now is speaking to all wetlands. and it's having a quite an impact on properties that are looking at having development. So the section that I mentioned dealing with hydrologic features, it states that outside of settlement areas, a proposal for new development or site alteration within 120 meters of a key natural heritage feature within a natural heritage system for the growth plan or a key hydrologic feature will require a natural heritage evaluation or a hydrologic evaluation that identifies a vegetation protection zone, which is of sufficient width to protect the feature and its functions from the impact of the proposed change, is established to achieve and be maintained as a natural self-sustaining vegetation. And for key hydrologic features, fish habitat and significant woodlands is no less than 30 meters measured from the outside boundary of the key natural heritage feature or the key hydrologic feature. So again, we're talking about development here. A development is inclusive of a new lot. And whenever there's a requirement for a new lot and they're within 120 meters of one of these hydrologic or natural heritage features, there's a trigger for a study to be undertaken to show that they're not going to have an impact on the feature. However, outside of settlement areas, section 4245, it does provide a little bit of hope for us in our area as far as some minor lot development. It does say outside of settlement areas and develop shoreline areas of inland lakes that are designated or zoned for concentrations of development as of July 1st, 2017. Infill development, redevelopment, or resort development is permitted subject to municipal and agency planning and regulatory requirements. So what we're getting at there is along your lakefront, and I'll pick on Stony Lake, majority of the lakefront there is designated that allows for cottage type uses. So this specific provision does allow for the continuation of infill development. So, you know, a lot being created that's subject to the infill definition that we have in the county official plan. So it does allow for some development to happen in the inland lakes area. So what's the common theme with both the PPS and the Greater Golden Horseshoe growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe? And that's studies. And I think that's something that your council is and planning committee is probably seeing on a regular basis, is the requirement that people that are coming forward with applications, there's a higher study requirement now in support of their applications. And so as you can see from the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, they've got some fairly detailed requirements. Whenever you are near a natural heritage feature or a key hydrologic feature, there is a requirement to do a study to show that the development will have no negative impact on the feature. So we're looking at environmental impact studies, natural heritage evaluation, stormwater management reports, how stormwater being dealt with, particularly with subdivisions, to ensure that stormwater flowing from the site isn't going to have any impact on the natural features, species at risk studies, and so those types of things. So this is my one and only colorful picture in this presentation, and I apologize that it's policy stuff, so it's not flashy. But this is a snapshot taken from our GIS, and I've centered it over the Warsaw area. And as you can see, everything that's in blue is considered either a key hydrologic or a natural heritage feature. And if I were to zoom in, it pulls those features even, you know, some other features start to turn on for even smaller wetland features. So the dark blue is provincially significant wetlands, and the lighter blue is either local or unevaluated wetland features. So depending on what side of the environmental fence you sit on, your municipality is either blessed or cursed with a number of wetland features. But as we deal with severances or plans of subdivision, as you can see from this screenshot of our GIS, there's not too many areas where we don't find that there's an environmental feature that is needs to be studied or needs to be looked at to ensure that the development isn't going to impact the feature as we process a particular application. So now I just wanted to talk a little bit about the severance process, because I believe there were some questions around that, and I just wanted to explain our process to your group. We do offer a preliminary severance review process here at the county. Applicants can submit their proposal, and we have the application is on our county website, and it's a free process. The planner who is responsible for the area of the township reviews the application against the planning legislation. So they look at the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, the official plan, the zoning bylaw, and reviews that as far as conformity with those documents and whether or not the proposal has merit. They also review it against that GIS features mapping that I just showed you, which pulls up wetlands, streams, ANSIs, etc., and identifies the need for supporting studies if someone wants to move forward with a formal proposal. And then we provide an actual report back to the applicant that explains, whether or not their proposal looks to be good, and recommend that they might want to move forward with the formal application, or that you're up against a wall, you've got all sorts of issues in that particular location or on that particular property, and that the potential of having a successful outcome isn't looking too rosy based on the policy environment and the information that we have. So a copy of that report is a note is given to the person that submitted it, and we also provide a copy to the township, so the township staff is aware that someone has come in and talked to us about a development proposal in your municipality. If someone decides to move forward to the formal application stage, this is when they file a formal application, pay the fee to the land division office here at the county. They must supply the required studies that were noted in the preliminary severance review report. So if there's a trigger for an environmental impact study, that's when it is submitted in support of the application. The application is then circulated for review under the regulations of the Planning Act. So there's specific agencies and people that we have to circulate to. And so those agencies review and comment on the application. Just cited a couple of them here that we circulate to consistently in your area, which is the township, the Conservation Authority, county roads, if the development proposal is on a county road, has frontage on a county road, or the Ministry of Transportation if it's within their corridor for review. So what happens to the studies once submitted? Well, again, I'm just looking at the environmental context here of studies that would be submitted if it was an environmental impact study. The county does have a memorandum of understanding with ORCA to peer review such studies on our behalf, since we don't have the in-house technical expertise. We don't have ecologists and biologists here in our planning department, so we do rely on ORCA to undertake that review on our behalf. Their staff review the studies and advise the county with respect to policy conformity. So they advise if it meets the conformity tests of the county official plan. They also look at it as with respect to the provincial policy statement and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and they advise us whether or not the study satisfies those policy tests and whether or not the development would be suggested for approval, and that the development wouldn't have any negative impact on the identified features that were studied. We then capture that in our formal planning report. We take all the information, all the comments from all the agencies, our own technical review of the official plan, and we make a recommendation to the Land Division Committee, and then a decision is ultimately made on the application. And then there's an appeal mechanism associated with that, where an appeal can be made to the LPAT if someone has issue with the either the approval or the denial of the application. So the key takeaways that I have at the end of this for you is, as hopefully I've been able to show from the Planning Act down, and how the province structures their documents is that we really are creatures of the province. They're calling the shots. We have to implement their policies and not only our planning documents. So our new county official plan that we're developing, we have to ensure that all of this policy in the Greater Golden Horseshoe and the provincial policy statement is captured in our documents. But we also have to ensure that we're following their documents in our planning decisions. So key takeaway that I have, that I deal with a lot, is don't shoot the messenger. ORCA staff, county staff, township staff, as our role here as advisors to the approval authorities, we have an obligation to ensure that the decisions conform and are consistent with the provincial policy in accordance with the Planning Act. So, lots of times I get a phone call and say, boy, it's really hardship on this person to have to go and do some sort of environmental impact study. It's just a little lot coming off the edge of the farm. The environmental features down the road, but as you can see, there's specific requirements in these documents that talk about, they set specific distances where a study is triggered, where it's required. And so, our role here is to ensure that when we make a recommendation to the approval authority, whether it be county council, land division, if we're providing you with some planning advice, that we're giving you advice that's consistent and conforms with the provincial policy statements. Because the ultimate test is if something is appealed, the LPAT also has to ensure that their decision on the planning matter is consistent. So when we have to go and give evidence at the LPAT, we have to be able to show them that we looked at all of the policies that were identified in the provincial planning documents and that we followed the course and that we required the studies to be submitted, peer reviewed, and to show that there were no negative impact on the features that were shown. So that's all I had for you today. Open to any questions.
Thank you, Ian. That was very informative. If somebody could turn back to gallery, and then I can see hands that go up. May have a question.
I will stop sharing. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Any questions that come to mind? No questions? Jim? You're muted, Jim.
I muted myself because someone's phoning me on my cell phone and I don't want to talk to them.
Right.
So I'd rather talk to you guys. Ian, through you, Carl, really good presentation. Will we have access to those slides? Because that's I'd like to put that in a binder and walk around with it. Okay.
Yes,
if you could forward them to Martina, and then each of us, anyone that would like copies, Martina can distribute. She'll have the emails for all of us handy, if that's okay, Martina?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Ian has provided me his slides, same as Jennifer, and
Okay,
they'll
good.
also be attached to the minutes of this meeting, so they're
Excellent.
always accessible on the website.
You're miles ahead of us. Thank you.
We try to be.
Okay, further questions? Tom, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Not really a question, more of a comment, but Ian, I guess one of the things that I noticed on there was your map. That really kind of brought it into perspective for me, because seeing all the light blue especially tells me that we have a lot of areas in our township that are sensitive, which, I knew we'd have some, but I really didn't realize it would be a portion of it. So, that's something that we can tell people, okay, here's a copy of the map. So you are within this area, stuff like that. So this is why you have to have that EC or, whatever studies need to be done. It gives us that visual perspective, and I appreciate that. And great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Sheila, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ian. Very good presentation. I think what caught my interest the most was don't shoot the messenger. That's a very good slide, and I think that a lot of people would understand more if they chose to read it. And one other comment, I did spend some time going over with a county staff member of the GIS system and what it produces. And there's an awful lot of information on there. And it would take me 2 or 3 times to learn how to find out all the detail, but very interesting and worth learning.
Any further questions? Heather, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I recall our council received a presentation a little more than a year ago. I remember we were in the council chamber, so it was definitely pre-pandemic days, from our Indigenous partners about a movement to have Indigenous consultations as part of the planning process. I believe that was in the very preliminary stages of discussion between our municipality and the county. Ian, I didn't hear you reference that at all. I'm just wondering if you can provide a brief update on what that looks like now.
Sure. So we went through a process with 2 of our local municipalities and the Peterborough-Kawartha Economic Development Corporation, as well as Hiawatha First Nation and Curve Lake First Nation. And it was funded by FCM. And it was to look at a number of issues. In particular, it was a bit of an economic development driver, but what fell of it is we also dealt with consultation discussions. And we actually received funding from FCM to develop a consultation tool on our GIS. So we have developed that with our First Nation partners, and that consultation tool, what it does is we can click on a property and run the consultation tool, and it will identify for us whether or not there are First Nation interests associated with a particular property. So it pulls up if we have any historic archaeological information. It pulls up wetland issues or wetlands that they may have interests in, streams, those types of things. So it was developed with our First Nation partners. We do use that tool. Larger developments, we have pre-consultation meetings. So we actually have our First Nations at the table with the pre-consultation. They sit down with all the other agencies that are in attendance, and they can speak to if they have any particular concerns or issues with the development, what the red flags are for them, or how a development could possibly be changed or mitigated in some fashion to deal with the First Nations issue. So I would say we've gone from next to no consultation a number of years ago to developing this new protocol. And I would say over the last year and a half, we signed what's called a friendship accord with our First Nations, the county did. And through that friendship accord, there's an obligation for us to have consultation with our First Nations. And so we do deal with them regularly. We circulate development applications to them for comment, and it seems to be working quite well. If anything, I'm finding that the First Nation staff, because Treaty 20, which we're a part of, the Treaty 20 area is such a large area, it goes well beyond Peterborough County. Our First Nation representatives are inundated. They're receiving development applications from everywhere, and they just don't have the staff to really keep up with the demand. So we developed this consultation tool, and it was a way for us to be able to screen out applications that they may not have interest in, to try and more focus applications that they would have an interest in. And we also noted to them, look, if the screening tool screens out a particular property that doesn't flag First Nations interest, but you still catch wind of something, or somebody contacts you and you want to be involved, by all means, we'll send you all the documentation and you can be involved. So I'd say we've had some growing pains, but I think we have a pretty good system right now, and I think everybody is relatively happy with how it works.
Okay, Martina?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to follow up on Councillor Watson's question, and after Ian's answer, he did a wonderful job explaining how the county works with First Nations, but Here at the township, we also work with our First Nations partners. Specifically, Curve Lake is the nation that we speak to the most. So when we get notice of someone who's interested in doing a Planning Act application, whether that's a rezoning or a minor variance, we hold pre-consultation meetings as well. We've taken the county's format and adopted it for ourselves. So we hold a pre-consultation meeting with that applicant or their agent. We invite the county, we invite the First Nations, specifically Curve Lake First Nations. If they're unavailable, they send Hiawatha First Nation instead. Orca staff, the road authority, whether that be the county or our road authority here, or perhaps it's MTO, depending if they're on the highway. And we do have a pre-consultation along the same lines as the county. And so the First Nations is there right at the ground floor of that project, and they're able to see it from that proposal stage all the way to the end and provide their comments throughout that process. They're also circulated on every application, whether they have concerns or not, just to keep them in the loop and make sure that they're getting any information they require. So at the township level, we are also well engaged with our First Nations partners.
Thank you, Martina. I believe Councillor Watson, you have a further question.
I did, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up. Ian, you mentioned that you use the consultation tool online to kind of quickly ascertain which properties may be impacted. Is that in that tool publicly accessible through the GIS on the county site, or is that a separate tool?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So no, that tool is not publicly accessible, and the reason for that is there is sensitive archaeological data that runs in the background on that tool. And so through our data sharing agreement we have with the province, because the archaeological data is sensitive, we cannot share it with the public. In fact, each municipality has identified planning staff that only have rights to the planning tab under the GIS, just because of the sensitivity of some of that information that we cannot release to the general public.
Thank you. Any further questions? I have a couple. Our opportunity in Douro-Dummer, because there's no large towns or cities, our only growth opportunity is primarily severance. And when you look at that map that Councillor Watt talked about, there's a lot of blue areas on there that require studies and can discourage a lot of people. And I understand a lot of those blue areas were as a result of satellite shots of the land that might be covered by woodland that they think is wetland, but is not wetland. And there they are having to prove that it's not a wetland. And some of these studies are, since last year, some of the studies are running from anywhere from 2,500 to 20,000. And that can be quite a discouragement to further development. Should we be asking for some kind of method to maybe somehow get some of those areas that may not be what they think they are out of there?
So for you, Mr. Chairman, the data that we have on the GIS is provided by the province. So all those wetland features, they have been identified and mapped by the province. The province no longer, early in my career, the province would go out and ground truth stuff. They stopped that a long time ago just because it costs a pile of money and they don't have the staff to do it anymore. So they do rely on a lot of satellite imagery. They rely on LiDAR, they rely on aerial photography. And so that's how a lot of that mapping is determined. Unfortunately, the only way to actually determine if it is accurate on the ground is through a study. And that is at the expense of the applicant who wants to develop their particular property. We do see a lot of studies that come in, and to be quite honest with you, lots of times the boundary of the wetland features or the environmental features are very close when they've studied them in the field. Like the accuracy of the information that they're using now, the satellite imagery, the aerial photography, and the LiDAR is so good that you know, a lot of what we're seeing is there might be a minor tweak to a wetland boundary, but realistically, it's not too far off. I have seen a few, in all fairness, that were way off. And the province has, you know, when they see the information, they review it, and they will make an adjustment, and it's immediately adjusted on our GIS system. But I don't know of any great solution other than, you know, if the municipality was interested in spending money to go out and study some of these features and ground truth them yourself. It's the way the system is set up, unfortunately, but it does put the onus on the applicant to prove the province wrong.
The next question is, you made reference to significant impact of woodlands and wetlands. Is significant defined in any fashion? Because a significant woodland, is that like more hardwoods and softwoods, or how to differentiate? And here again, requirement for a study.
Yeah, so again, significant woodlands are, it is a defined term in the provincial policy statement.
Okay.
I don't want to put Jennifer on the spot, who's going to do a presentation here shortly, but it might be a better question for Jennifer.
Sure.
Significant, the term significant, again, it is defined in those documents. It has been subject to many OMB and LPAT decisions on what is deemed a significant impact or what is deemed to have no impact. Anything like walking through the forest has an impact on the forest, right? So there's grades of impact levels that have been tested at LPAT as far as what would be considered as having no negative impact.
And one final question is the agricultural component of the new provincial PPS. Would that be the commenting agency that you would provide, or would that be, should we be challenging the consultants that are looking at the wetland and the species at risk to address agriculture best practices as well?
So I'm just trying to understand the question a little more, Carl.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, for example, location of a lot
Right.
on a property. Who would comment yay or nay on that before it got to the committee stage?
Okay. So the primary tool that we use is the designation on the lands, right? So when we look at agricultural lands, the province has given us the agricultural priority mapping.
Yep.
I believe in Douro-Dummer, currently there is no prime ag lands. I
No.
see Martina shaking her head, and I thought that was the case. But it doesn't mean that you don't have some obviously good farms in the rural area, and that, you know, you're looking for protective measures for those farms. So there are some tools in place, you know, like minimum distance separation is still a requirement from any barn feature to ensure that we're not creating lots that are going to impact the function of a barn or the ability of that barn to expand in the future. But I think what, you know, the issue, and you and I had a conversation about this last week, is, you know, the issue of taking lots out of the middle of a farm field versus it being at a field edge where it's going to have less or minimum impact on the overall farm operation. That is something that, you know, we always try to push people in that direction, but sometimes there's mitigating factors that don't allow for that to occur. But I don't think there's any argument from anyone that, you know, always the best option if someone is trying to sever a lot off the farm, it should be at a field edge where it's going to have the least impact on the operation and function of that field.
It turns out in this case, there was other issues that couldn't be.
Right.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
And Jennifer, I guess you're on next. Thank you very much for attending. And I see you've got Matt in the wings. Any tough questions, Matt, to answer?
No, you can. I'll make sure that I shield him from any questions. That's what they pay me the big money for. I'm just going to bring up my screen here. All right. How are we? Are we seeing what I'm seeing?
Yep.
Okay. Also, if I get a little buzzy, somebody just sort of waggle your hand a little bit. I'm in a strange spot in my house, actually a former closet. So I'm surrounded by 3 walls. So if my sound gets a little off, just let me know and I can move it around a little bit. Again, thanks for having me here today. I think I gave a similar presentation to some of y'all about 2 years ago. It was 2019. Ian noted that the most recent growth plan iteration was approved on May 16th, 2019. And I think I gave that presentation about 8 days after that last iteration was approved. So some of this is going to sound a little familiar to some of you. So thanks for staying with me if there's some repeat. But I'm going to talk today a lot of the same stuff, but looking at it through a slightly different lens as to why we do, and maybe a little bit more about the particularities of it. What I'm going to take you through is first, what is a conservation authority, in case there's any doubts about that. People getting planning approvals, getting a permit, and answering the question, am I in a flooding hazard? So who are we? We are the Otonabee Region Conservation Authority, most widely known as ORCA in our watershed, although we do go by the more stylistic name of Otonabee Conservation as well. We were established in 1959, so we're 62 years old this year. We are one of 36 conservation authorities that were established under the Conservation Authorities Act. I think this slide is a tiny bit dated where it says the objective of a conservation authority, which is to provide and undertake in the area over which it has jurisdiction, a program designed to further the conservation, restoration, development, and management of natural resources. I think that's been tweaked in one of the many iterations of the Conservation Authorities Act we've had in the last few years, but it still hasn't fundamentally changed what we do. Words may be different, but what we're doing really often remains the same. This is a map of where we sit in this part of the province. Otonabee Conservation is right there in the middle. We've got Kawartha to the west of us, the Crow to the east, and Douro-Dummer, the watershed boundary between Otonabee Conservation and the Crow actually kind of wiggles right along the boundary of the township. We've got Ganaraska and Lower Trent to the south of us. This is a screenshot of a handy tool from the Conservation Ontario website, where if folks are not sure which conservation authority jurisdiction they're in, or if they're in one at all, because you can see that on the north shore of the lakes, there isn't a CA in our neck of the woods. So you can just type in your address so you can find that out pretty quickly. A little bit more about us. We are composed of around about 105,000 people. We've got 8 member municipalities, 1,951 square kilometers. We often describe ourselves as being bound by the Kawartha Lakes in the north, Rice Lake in the south, Norwood in the east, and Millbrook in the southwest. So that's just a little bit about us. I'm going to take you right into getting planning approvals and our role in it. We have 2 main roles in the planning approval process. The first one is sort of our more long-standing role, a little more traditional that people would understand our role. It's our bread and butter. Our CAs have been delegated authority for representing provincial interests that Ian mentioned before as it relates to matters, natural hazard matters of the PPS. This is an advice-giving role. You often hear in the community people talking about ORCA approving or not approving a Planning Act application. No, we are not decision makers here. It's the granting authorities, not us. What we do is that we review the applications and any of the supporting materials, and we advise the municipality, whoever the granting authority is, if the application is consistent or in conformity, in this case it's consistent with the PPS, and why or why not. Section 3.1 of the PPS directs development and site alteration away from hazardous lands, including flooding hazards, erosion hazards, and dynamic beach hazards, which we don't have in our watershed. This language is very direct in the PPS. It's a straight out prohibition, and our comments tend to reflect that unambiguity unambiguity, lack of ambiguity. So I've only got one slide on this role, but I always want to make sure it's not underplayed. This is a critical part of keeping everyone safe. The second role we have is quite similar in that we're providing that same advice, review and advice provision service around whether or not applications are consistent with the appropriate policies, but this time we're doing it directly for our member municipalities. Like Ian said, we have an MOU with the county. To do that, we also have an MOU with Douro-Dummer in each of our member municipalities. So we're a service provider for you. In many regards, we're the environmental department, the biologists, so the ecologists that you don't have on staff. The main policies that we use are the PPS and the growth plan. This is probably starting to sound familiar. As well, we look at local official plans, whether they be lower tier or upper tier. I'm splitting this up a little bit as to what you can and cannot do versus whether you're in a settlement area or whether you're not in a settlement area. If you're in a settlement area, we're really looking at the PPS and any official plan policies to determine consistency or conformity. The features that we look at, we call these the usual suspects because they've been in the policy world for a long time. So we've got significant wetlands, woodlands, valley lands, wildlife habitat, ANSIs, habitat of endangered and threatened species, fish habitat, and sensitive surface water and groundwater features. That's what we're looking at if somebody's proposing development in a settlement area. If you're outside of a settlement area, that's where we start to see the growth plan start being layered on top of PPS policies. So if you're looking to develop outside of a settlement area, we've got our usual suspects, but we also have a few additions. We've got sand barrens, savannas, tallgrass prairies, and alvars. I don't really know that we have them in our watershed. It would be kind of cool if we did find an alvar. We also have through the growth plan are those key hydrologic features Ian was talking about. This is kind of new on the policy landscape, not the features, but it includes permanent streams, intermittent streams, inland lakes, seeps, springs, and wetlands. There's also key hydrologic areas, which are wider, more amorphous things that include recharge areas, highly vulnerable aquifers, contribution areas as well. The big key here is the addition of the key hydrologic features and what it means for people. So if you're inside of a settlement area, development and site alteration is generally not permitted in a significant feature except for PSW. PSWs is a hard no. That's your provincially significant wetland. Policy is very clear on that. But other ones, there may be, not typically, but a maybe. An EIS is required to support any development or site alteration within 120 meters of the significant feature to show that there's not going to be an impact. Now, if you're outside of a settlement area, development and site alteration is not permitted in some of those key natural heritage features, any of the significant features, but as well those key hydrologic areas. And Ian showed you that map. Our experience is before you're 120 meters away from one key hydrologic area in parts of our watershed, you are within 120 meters of another one. Our watershed is at least a quarter wetland. And those are the ones we know about and we can measure. So yeah, there's a lot of water in our watershed. If you're outside a settlement area, if you're going to be within 120 meters of those key natural heritage features or those key hydrologic features, you do need an EIS. Recognizing that, again, that affects a lot of properties, we do recommend that folks, before they go out and start doing these reports, we really, really recommend that their consultant that they use contact us so that we can scope the study. So we make sure that the consultant is looking for the things that will answer those policy questions and doesn't do more work than is actually required. So you don't have a person paying for study elements that, sure, they're nice, but they're not required. So that terms of reference with us in the scoping is very important to make sure they're doing the right work. One of the other things as well is a vegetative protective zone, otherwise known as a buffer. If you're outside a settlement area, the minimum buffer you can have is 30 meters. In a settlement area, we can have discussions about, hey, maybe a 15-meter buffer with some enhancements is sufficient. That's not an option when you're outside of a settlement area. I wanted to briefly note a little bit about NHSs. Ian, well, you're probably all aware, and Ian has noted, the county is in the process of updating their OP. As part of all the OP updates that are going across the province, municipalities are obligated to implement a natural heritage system. So both the city and the county are in the process of doing that. There is the provincial NHS, but there is also another one that was developed in our watershed. And from what I understand, there are discussions over which one would be the most appropriate. The key thing the message that I want to leave people with, because I've seen folks get a little stressed about this, is because they are reflective of local conditions and local needs, these NHSs can look a little different. And that's okay. So if somebody is on one side of the boundary in the city or the other, you can have different policies around your natural heritage system. It's not a reflection of the flaw of the framework, it's a reflection of local conditions. As well, the growth plan in 2017 introduced policies specifically designed to protect shoreline areas. This is new. We've traditionally recognized the importance of shoreline areas, but there's not been a whole lot that directly gets at it. There are 10 policy points within the growth plan. Most of them are best management practices. You can see I sort of highlighted the key ones. They're fairly common sense. You know, maintain your 30-meter buffers where possible. Try to increase fish habitat. Minimize erosion. You know, use your stormwater controls. The preference is for natural shoreline treatments, which is a challenge in certain places where people love their armor stone, and as well having your proper sewage treatment. What's different here is, while this has traditionally been a best management practice, now the applicant has to go through some effort to demonstrate that, yeah, I'm doing these things, and if I'm not doing it, here's why. That's a little bit new too. Some folks get really stressed out because most cottage lots are already developed. The policy does recognize that, but you still have to make some effort there. And one last note on site plan and shoreline lots. Site plan control is a form of development control that is provided to municipalities under the Planning Act. They're traditionally used for commercial, industrial, or multi-res areas, but they can also be applied to shoreline development. The reason I highlight that is, to my knowledge, that's not been done in Douro-Dummer before, but some neighboring municipalities have used that approach. So again, if you hear people talking, well, in Selwyn they do this, or well, here they do that, it's an option that the municipality has if you are finding your shoreline development is not conforming to what you're asking them to do, but it's a neither good nor bad if you have it or don't. And that takes us to getting a permit, which is one of our other roles in the development process, and they do often get confirmed. This is a bit of a throwback nostalgia pick that I have here, back in the day when we actually got to go to the office and notice how close everyone's sitting to each other. It's not going to look like that when we go back. So permitting under ORCA. This is something I think that is particularly in the rural areas. People have an understanding that we exist in, we have a role to play. Under Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act, that's where we get our ability to regulate specific activities through the permitting process. We each have our own regulation under the Conservation Authorities Act. We are OREG 16706. The CA Act went through a comprehensive review and update in 2017. There were additional changes that were made in 2019, reflecting the different priorities of the new government. New regulations implementing those changes were anticipated in 2020. What happened instead was part of the 2020 budget. Additional changes were introduced to the CEA Act. It really captured the imagination of the environmental community. I don't think I've ever seen, environmental land use planning hitting a headline in a newspaper, but we saw that. Some of the changes that were made to the Conservation Authorities Act included the legal requirement for a CA to issue a permit with appropriate conditions where a minister's zoning order, so MZOs, that you may have been hearing about, has been made by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So if an MZO has been issued and a permit is required, the CA is obligated to issue the permit. It's also created the option for the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry to take over and make a permit decision in place of the CA at their discretion. Our appeal mechanisms have changed a little bit, so now you can appeal directly to the minister, or you can go to the LPAT. It used to be the Mining and Lands Commissioner. And similar to planning, now if a CA does not make a decision on an application within 120 days, they can appeal directly to LPAT as well. We really don't know what the uptake of these options are going to look like, and we don't really know what kind of pressure that'll put on the organization resources and how that'll affect how we do our business. It's still very new. We're still wrapping our head around it. But I have heard on the landscape people talking about MZOs a lot, and maybe not understanding always what it is and is not. So that's probably, if you hear talk about it, that it's probably around there. We were told we would be getting new regulations that were supposed to come out last year in January 2021. It's the end of April. We still don't have them. I wouldn't be surprised if the province has different priorities right now, given where we are at with COVID. But getting to the meat of our permitting role, this lists the features that we regulate. I want you to sort of notice the slides that I had shown you about what we look at and comment at on under planning. There's that list of the usual suspects under the PPS, and then that second slide that listed our key hydrologic features and the key hydrologic features in the key hydrologic areas. Traditionally, people have viewed what we comment on planning as being the same as what we regulate. As planning policy and natural heritage planning policy has broadened its scope, that's no longer really an accurate assumption. What we regulate and go through a permitting process for is narrower in scope than what the planning policy gets at now. So they're not sort of proxy. The things we might talk about under permitting won't necessarily look the same as what we talk about on planning. And that's an important thing to just sort of keep at the back of your mind. What we regulate, river, stream, valleys, hazardous lands, again, our flooding hazards, our erosion hazards, unstable soils, wetlands in their areas of interference, watercourses, and the shorelines of inland lakes. What do we consider development? Our definition is very, very broad. Development under the Conservation Authorities Act is the construction, reconstruction, erection, or placing of a building or structure of any kind. It's a change to a building or structure that could change the use of it, that could increase the size of it or the number of dwelling units in it. It's any site grading, and it's the temporary or permanent placing, dumping, or removal of any fill material. Getting a permit, we have a long and fulsome policy manual that does outline, what are the key details that we're looking for in order to issue a permit. It's monstrous, about 200 plus pages. So in a presentation, I don't take people through all of our policies. What I include instead is a slide that outlines and shows what are the principles that are at play when we develop these policies. Again, I really want to highlight here, so what you're seeing is that this is largely a natural heritage piece, a natural hazard piece of legislation. We're looking at impact and risk and public health and safety. It's not so much of a birds, bugs, and bunnies piece. This is just a slide showing our updated permitting process. Just like municipalities, we had to very quickly change the way we did business last year, moving to a paper-based, a very heavily paper-based process that the regulations we've been waiting on were to change. So we had to very quickly change it. I think it went pretty well, all things considered. One thing that is new for us now is in 2021, we have implemented a complete application process. Municipalities have been doing it, have been required to have it under planning for a while. It's been optional in the CA world for a long time. We made the decision to harmonize it with the planning process and to deal with incomplete applications if that was something we were going to implement at our authority. This is a shameless self-promotion slide. As we moved to an entirely digital process, and you'll probably have heard this from municipal staff, our email inboxes exploded because all of our traffic and all of our interaction with folks was now being done over email. We had some folks who, in trying to ask a question, didn't know who to ask, so would send random emails to anyone at the authority. Or we had some folks who took more of a buckshot approach and would send their question to everyone at the authority. And it was just clogging up the system and making it a little inefficient. So we created an online form that's more like a ticket that you submit online so that folks can say, you know, this is where I live, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And what that allows us to do, it allows us to triage, read the question and triage it to the right person the first time, instead of bouncing around individual staff people at the authority. And it also allows us to even out our workload. So for example, if somebody submits a property inquiry ticket through our system and it's really a planning issue in Douro-Dummer, it's going to go straight to Matt because Matt's the planner here, as opposed to maybe it first hitting our dams operation person who then has to figure out where it goes. So people don't always love a form, but we find that those folks who use the forms are the ones who gets their answers the fastest because it's the most efficient way. We're really encouraging people to use it. And a little bit about our timelines. Probably in the worst timing ever, we committed for 2021 to adopt updated customer service guidelines. We previously were working on provincial guidelines for permit turnarounds, where it was 30 days for a minor permit and 90 days for a major permit. We voluntarily adopted the Conservation Ontario standards for 2021, just as our volumes were going through the roof. And this is the reporting on our first quarter for 2021. So we had 32 permits go through our system where they came in after January 1st and they were issued before March 31st, which is not reflective of the full volume of what we've done. But during that time, we had 31 permits come in and get out in the timeline, and their average was 6.4 days. We had one that fell through the cracks there. And that's something where we're going to be reporting publicly on a quarterly basis going forward. And hopefully it'll help people understand how to time their applications. Which takes us to, I cannot do a presentation without talking about flooding hazards, and how to learn more about flooding hazards is how does somebody understand if they're in a flooding hazard. From the 1970s to the 1990s, floodplain mapping was largely funded by the federal government, and then it was stopped in the 1990s. As a result, most new floodplain mapping stopped being produced because it's a rather expensive undertaking. In the mid-2010, funding was made available again under a federal program. We went after that funding really aggressively. We have been successful in undertaking in the last few years 9 floodplain mapping projects in our watershed. The Kawartha Lakes project, which was mapping the shoreline, that one is complete. Mead Creek is complete. Curtis Creek is 95% complete. The portion that is east of the canal in Douro-Dummer is complete. We have to finalize some infrastructure work that was done in East City to release the whole thing. And we've got a few other projects that are waiting in the wings to be released to the public. Mead Creek, we will probably re-release again, because last year I think we released it in February as folks were really starting to realize that our world was about to change. So we really didn't get a ton of engagement. So at some point I'm going to put it back out again so that folks can engage with the results. So we have made significant strides in the last few years as to being able to provide our watershed residents with current and updated floodplain mapping information. For each project, as we release it, they can go to the project page on our website and they can search their property so that they can understand, oh, hey, am I in the floodplain of Mead Creek? I don't know. They can answer those questions. And again, if they have, once they see the map, if they have any questions at all, they can get in touch with us through the property inquiry process, and we can walk them through what it means to them. I always talk about this as well. What does it mean when you're living in a floodplain? The key messages I want folks to walk away from is that if your property is in a floodplain, the owner can still continue to live at, enjoy, and sell their property. Floodplain maps don't put a property in the floodplain. They simply show where the floodplain and the risk already exists. And the final message is the rules around developing in a flooding hazard have not changed. The maps are a new tool that help people determine upfront from the beginning if a proposed development is at risk for flooding. So I'll say thank you, and I will end on another shameless self-promotion slide that starting on March 1st of this year, we were open for online campsite bookings at Beaver Mead and particularly Warsaw Caves. The stay-at-home orders are a little bit of a hurdle or a crink in the plan, but we still are accepting online reservations so that as soon as we are allowed out of our houses and able to get to campsites again, folks can come spend some time at Warsaw Caves. With that, I will stop my share and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, very much. I understand the campsite bookings are going pretty quickly. There's not a lot left, so.
Yeah, folks want out of their house.
Great. Questions, just raise your hand. I'll try to make sure I see anyone. Very good presentation, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Any questions that come to light? Any questions from staff? Alana, do you have anything from either Ian or Jennifer?
No, I don't think so at this time.
Good. Or Brian?
I was just going to throw in, you made a comment there about site plan control. We do have one or two that go under site plan control. Usually they're very unique properties, and we'll put a holding symbol on it and say in order to get the holding symbol off, you have to go through site plan control. And so that does happen occasionally, just not very often. Certainly not as often as other municipalities take advantage of that tool, but it is a process that we do go through the odd time.
Okay, with no other questions, Martina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer, I'm used to using the staff version of GIS. Is the floodplain mapping now on the public side of the GIS?
I believe it, once it's approved, I believe it goes onto the public county GIS. When we released the Kawartha Lakes, pardon me, through you, Chair, when we released the Kawartha Lakes floodplain mapping, in that interim period where it was out for public engagement but hadn't yet been approved, then it was on the internal GIS. But once the OPA was approved, then I believe it was put out on the public.
Through you, the Chair, just a follow-up question. On your website, do you still have the public information about the studies we went through and how all the different steps we took? Remember you'd made a story map, I think, at one point?
For you, I would have to go back and check, to be honest. Most of our stuff, we're getting ready to do a bit of a refresh of our information because things really did stop last March. Many of our projects are waiting in the wings because some of our municipalities have been very clear that they don't have the bandwidth to kind of do and they don't feel it's the right time to do the engagement process with the public. They're distracted, and municipalities almost daily have to figure out what's open and what's not. So they're kind of sitting in abeyance. But we are also going to use the opportunity to kind of zazz them up a little bit, and having seen what other folks have been doing and recognizing we're going to be doing an online consultation is really beef up the information that is on the website, because I don't see us having a scenario where people are going to be coming in to meetings. So I think it's probably static to where it was before, but it is going to be refreshed.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully, both members of the Planning Committee, Committee Adjustment, and Council have been very appreciative of this. Certainly, it answers a lot of questions about the fact that we are the creation of the province, and we have no choice but to follow the rules. It's just how we follow them in a responsible fashion. So thank you, Martina, for arranging this for us all. And I guess if there's nothing else, if I could have a motion to adjourn. It's not by Sheila and seconded by Heather. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to help us. And you're always welcome in Douro-Dummer.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Have a good day.